Welcome to the Savage Executive Podcast. My name is Steve Smith, and whether you're running a company, leading a department, or building your first team, this is where faith-driven leaders come to sharpen. This is wisdom for the weight that you carry. Let's get into it. Your organization has a culture. The only question is whether you designed it or whether you drifted into it. Most leaders, if they're honest, they drifted into it. Not because they were careless, but because culture is invisible until it isn't. You don't notice the drift until you see a behavior you didn't expect from a person that you trusted. Until a high performer resigns and you realize during the exit interview that they experienced the organization completely differently than you thought that they did. Until a value statement on a wall has nothing to do with the decisions being made in the room. You see, culture is the accumulation of what you reward, what you tolerate, how decisions actually get made, what stories you tell, and what the people doing the best work actually believe about this place. It is not what your website says. It is not what you aspire to. It is what is demonstrably true day in and day out to the people who work here. Here's what makes culture particularly dangerous for leaders. You are the last person in the room to see it clearly. Your positional authority distorts the signal. People manage up. They tell you what they believe that you want to hear. They soften feedback in the hallway. They smile through frustration and protect you from the truth. It's not necessarily because they are malicious, but it's out of self-preservation, which means if you want to know what your culture actually is, you have to go out looking for it deliberately and systematically. The good news, culture can be changed. The prerequisite, it has to be seen clearly first. And today, we're doing a culture audit, 5 diagnostic questions that will tell you more about your organization in an honest hour than most engagement surveys do in a year. A culture audit is not a performance review. It's not a criticism of your team. It's a structured examination of the gap between your stated culture and your operating culture. The difference between who you say you are and what you actually do. The goal here is not to find fault. The goal is to see clearly because you cannot lead what you cannot see. So let's dive into these questions. The first question in our culture audit is, what do we reward? This is the most revealing question in any organization. Not what you say you value, what you actually reward. Reward doesn't mean bonuses or promotions only. Reward means what gets noticed, what gets praised, what gets amplified in your culture. Think about it this way. If you say you value teamwork, but consistently celebrate individual contributors, you're really rewarding individualism. If you say you value innovation, but every creative proposal gets buried in an approval process, you're actually rewarding compliance. If you say you value excellence, but you promote people based on tenure rather than performance, you're rewarding time served. And your team watches. They watch what gets rewarded, and then they make rational decisions about where they are going to invest their energy. The culture audit question that you should be asking, in the last quarter, what behaviors received the most visible recognition from leadership? Write those down. Are those the behaviors you want to compound? Ministry leaders, this is especially critical. What you celebrate from the stage or in staff meetings or in one-on-ones are the seeds of your culture. What are you planting? All right, culture audit question number 2. What do we tolerate? You see, what gets tolerated becomes what gets normalized. What gets normalized becomes what gets expected. And what gets expected eventually becomes what gets demanded of everyone, including the people who never wanted to behave that way. I've watched organizations tolerate passive-aggressive communication for years until it became the dominant mode of interaction. I've watched churches tolerate gossip under the label of prayer requests until the culture became toxic. Toleration is not grace. Grace confronts and restores. Toleration ignores and normalizes. The distinction matters enormously because a leader who mistakes tolerance for kindness is not protecting their team. They are slowly poisoning the culture they are responsible for. The silence of leadership is always interpreted as approval by the people watching. So your culture audit question, what behavior has leadership consistently declined to address in the last 6 months? Name it specifically. What has that silence communicated to the rest of the team? All right, our third question for today. How do decisions actually get made? Your decision-making process tells your team everything about what you actually value, far more than any value statement ever could. Is authority clear, or does it shift depending on who's in the room? Do decisions get made at the right level? Or does everything flow upward to a leader who can't or won't delegate authority? Are decisions made based on data and principle, or based on relationship proximity, who you know and who you like? The operating decision-making process is one of the clearest x-rays of organizational culture available to you. It reveals who actually has power, what principles actually guide choices, whether accountability is real or rhetorical, and whether the organization trusts its own people. A decision process that consistently ignores stated authority structures eventually destroys belief in those structures entirely. So how do you apply this question? Well, think of the last 3 significant decisions your organization made. Who made them? At what level? Based upon what criteria? Was the process consistent with your stated values? For ministry organizations, this question often surfaces a painful truth about whether the senior leader has actually released authority or is simply managing the appearance of having done so. Culture audit question number 4. What stories do we tell? Every culture runs on stories. The stories we tell about our past, our wins, our failures, our heroes, our founding moments. These are the operating mythology of the organization. They tell people what is true about this place and what it means to belong here. The problem is that most leaders tell the same 3 stories on rotation without examining whether those stories are still pointing the culture in the right direction. A founding story that was inspiring 10 years ago may now be reinforcing a posture that is limiting growth. A hero story that celebrates an individual who burned out or behaved poorly may be teaching exactly the wrong lesson about what success looks like here. Stories are not neutral. They are the curriculum of your culture. What you celebrate as stories, you reinforce as expectations. How do we apply this culture audit question? Well, what are the 3 stories most often told about this organization? What values do they reinforce? Are those the values you want your team living into today? All right, our last question, number 5. Would our best people say this is true? This is the hardest question and the most important one. Not what the average employee thinks, not what your most loyal followers believe. What do your best people, your highest performers, your most mission-aligned team members, the people you cannot afford to lose, what do they actually experience about the culture that you say you have? Because here's what's true. Best people have options. They tolerate dysfunction less because they can go elsewhere. They see culture with clear eyes because they're comparing it to other environments. And they leave quietly rather than fighting, which is why their exits are often the last warning sign before a culture crisis becomes a culture collapse. The question is not, whether your best people are satisfied. The question is whether they are staying because the culture is strong or in spite of the fact that it isn't. So how do we apply this culture audit question? Think about it this way. If your top 3 performers sat down honestly, not in a performance review, not protecting your feelings, and they described what it's actually like to work here, what would they say? Do you know? When did you last ask them? Several years ago, our organization was struggling with turnover at a level that honestly concerned us. We were losing employees every year at a pace that was simply too high and unsustainable. Good people were leaving, some quietly, some frustrated, some just exhausted. And eventually we had to confront a difficult reality. This was not just a staffing issue, it was a culture issue. At the time, it would have been easy to blame the education market because a lot of our school staff was leaving, or compensation pressure because as a ministry organization, we can't pay as much as they could make somewhere else. Or it could be generational changes, or all the normal explanations that leaders use. But when we really stepped back and started asking deeper questions, we realized something uncomfortable. Culture drift had quietly taken place over time. It wasn't intentional, it wasn't malicious, but gradual. There were inconsistent expectations across teams, negative conversations that had become normalized, communication issues that leadership had tolerated too long. And while our mission was strong, the daily experience of working inside the organization did not always reflect the kind of culture we said we wanted. So we decided to conduct what I would now call a true culture audit. Not a survey exercise, not a branding exercise, but an honest examination of reality. We started by rebuilding leadership. We brought in a new head of school and raised up leaders internally over the following years who aligned with the direction we believed the culture needed to move. Then we became extremely intentional about identity. We established core values, identity statements, clear expectations for communication, teamwork, professionalism, and excellence. And one of the biggest shifts was this. We stopped tolerating gossip and overt negativity as acceptable parts of the culture. Now, that did not mean people could not disagree. Healthy teams need honest conversations, but we draw a distinction between constructive communication and corrosive communication. One strengthens culture, the other quietly destroys it. At the same time, we worked hard to recognize and celebrate our staff more intentionally, because culture is not only shaped by what you correct, it is also shaped by what you reinforce. And over time, something remarkable has happened. The expectation of excellence has risen. Communication has improved. Alignment has improved. Ownership improved. And this year, our turnover rate is the lowest in the history of our organization. Think about that. Same mission, same organization, but a transformed culture. That experience taught me something that I now believe deeply as a leader. Culture does not change accidentally. It changes intentionally. And if you are unwilling to audit the culture honestly, eventually the culture will audit you through turnover, dysfunction, disengagement, and frustration. But when leaders are willing to see clearly, own reality honestly, and lead intentionally, culture can absolutely change. I want to speak just for a moment specifically to ministry leaders in the room. The culture audit can feel particularly uncomfortable in ministry context because the stakes feel spiritually charged in a way they don't in a business setting. If the culture is unhealthy, does that mean we failed God? Does that mean the work we have done wasn't anointed? No, it means that you are human leaders leading human organizations in a fallen world. You see, culture drift is not a spiritual indictment. It is a leadership reality. And the willingness to audit, to hold your organization against the standard of what you say you believe, is itself an act of integrity before God. When I think about scripture, I think about Nehemiah. Nehemiah audited the walls before he rebuilt them. He walked the perimeter in the night alone, assessing the damage honestly before he said a word to anyone. The audit preceded the work. The clarity preceded the construction. The willingness to see clearly was the foundation of the entire rebuilding effort. That is the pastoral invitation of the culture audit. See your organization as it actually is, with the same honesty and compassion you bring to shepherding people. Then lead it toward what it is called to be. One final reflection before the savage takeaway. The leaders who do this work consistently, who build the discipline of seeing clearly into their regular rhythms rather than reserving it for moments of crisis, develop something that most leaders never have: organizational foresight. They see drift before it becomes damage. They see friction before it becomes fracture. They see the gap before it becomes a chasm. That is the compounding return of the clarity discipline practiced consistently over time. So here's the savage takeaway for today. You cannot audit what you are unwilling to see, and you cannot lead what you cannot see clearly. What we have just unpacked is discipline of clarity, one of the 5 disciplines inside of the Savage Advantage playbook. You cannot lead what you cannot see. The culture audit is not a criticism of your organization. It's an act of leadership. See it clearly, then lead it intentionally. Clarity is always the prerequisite for the next level of impact. Proverbs 27:17 says that iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend. Think about that. Iron sharpens iron. That sharpening process is not comfortable. It involves friction, pressure applied at the right angle to produce an edge. A blade that is never pressed against anything harder than itself does not stay sharp. It dulls. An organization that never holds itself against a standard that creates honest friction does not grow. It normalizes. The culture audit is the friction. It is the iron pressing against the iron of your actual values. It will produce discomfort. The recognition of the gap between who you say you are and who you actually are. But that discomfort is the sharpening, and sharpened organizations are the ones that stay ahead. They are the ones that are effective over the long term. Notice also the relational framing. A man sharpening the countenance of his friend. It's not a stranger, it's a friend. Someone invested in you who tells the truth because they are for you. Build the kind of culture where this kind of sharpening happens inside of the organization regularly, not just when a crisis forces it. Can I encourage you this week? Take one of the 5 questions and bring it to your leadership team. Not as an accusation, but as a genuine inquiry. Pick the question you most want to look away from. That's the one that matters the most. Set aside an hour, maybe even an hour and a half. Ask it honestly. Listen without defending. Take notes. Do not explain. Don't justify. Don't redirect. Just receive what you hear. And here's the diagnostic question from the Savage Advantage playbook for this discipline. If your team described what matters most this quarter, would they all give the same answer? Take that question seriously this week. Write your answer down. It will tell you more about the health of your organization than most assessments ever will. I referenced the Savage Advantage playbook today. It is absolutely free at savageexecutive.com. I would encourage you go there right now and download the Savage Advantage playbook at savageexecutive.com. This playbook talks about the 5 disciplines, the 5 pillars that the entire Savage Executive Network is built upon. It gives you some strategies, some guides about how you can implement those 5 disciplines into your organization starting today. It will be a tremendous help to you in your leadership. Download it today at savageexecutive.com. I want to thank you for joining us today. If you've not yet subscribed to our podcast, please hit subscribe. Jump over to our YouTube channel at Savage Executive and subscribe there as well. We're so thankful to continue building this community of leaders. And if you know of a leader that would be encouraged by this podcast, send it to them. Help grow this community. Leave a review if you're able as well. But I want to thank you for joining me in the conversation. Continue to reach out to me at steve@savageexecutive.com. Find me at savageexecutive.com, and we will continue the conversation there and through social media. Hope you have a great week and continue to lead up as we continue to lead in a Savage Executive type of way.